We are very happy to have Ajahn Doungdao here, talking about her latest paper with Ajahn Visarut, who is with the Middle Tennessee State University. So Ajahn Doungdao, you have roughly 20 minutes. We have plenty of time, so you can go over. After Ajahn Doungdao, we are going to open the floor for Q&A. But if you have a question during the session, please feel free to either raise your hand or chat. All right, the floor is yours, Ajahn Doungdao.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank you, the Economic Research Center, for organizing this virtual seminar. So this is the second in the series, right, Ajahn Atipat?
Yes.
Okay, so more interesting presentations to come. Okay, so I'm presenting this paper of mine that I co-write with Dr. Visarut, who also alumni here at Econ Chula. Okay, and the title is Understanding the Bimodality of Export Intensity Distribution in Thailand. Okay, so I want to first give out some facts, okay, in the international trade literature. Okay, so during the 90s, when the firm level data first become available, so we have three established stylized facts. Okay, the first one is that very few firms export, so exporting activity is rare. So for example, here you have the data from the US documented in Bernard 2003. Only 1/5 of the firms export, and for in Thailand it's even more rare. So around like 5% of firms export. So this is the first fact that has been established and verified. Okay. The second fact is that exporters are superior in many of the firms' performance measures. For example, they are bigger, they are larger, they are more productive, and they pay higher wages for compared to firms that only sell in the domestic market. Okay, and this fact has also been verified in many countries. Okay, so here now comes the last facts that is the motivation of this paper. Okay, so the data from the US and few other countries, for example, Colombia and France, we document that among the exporting firms, okay, they sell a very small share of their output in the overseas market. So they sell most of their product domestically. Okay, for example, here you see that more than 50% of firms, like 2/3 of the firms, sell less than 10% of their products. Okay, so here you have the export intensity by 10%, 10 to 20%. And then you can see that firms less than 5% of them export more than 50% of their output. Okay, so this pattern has found in also in Colombia and France, as I mentioned. However, okay, recent research has documented new facts that when you look into the export intensity, which defined as the share of firms total revenue accounted for by exports, it's actually varies substantially across countries and often is bimodal. Okay. So the Fever and Rhino, they took the firm level data from the World Bank Enterprise Survey for 72 countries. Okay, and what they see as follows. So the left panel, the left graph, you can see the pattern that coincide with what other authors found for the US, Colombia, and France. So most of the firms sell their output in the domestic market and sell a very small share abroad. Okay, and then you see the second graph in the middle for Bangladesh, Philippines, and Madagascar, it's the opposite story. Okay, most of the firms sell in the overseas market, so sell their products abroad. Okay. And now come the last panel, which is you can see that the concentration of mass is at the two extremes of the distribution, near 0 and 1. Okay. So we see this for 2/3 of the 72 countries they use in their study. So this is rather interesting because we thought that it is the established facts that most of the firms sell their output in the domestic market, and it is not the case here. Okay, so this question is interesting because first, if you take the trade model, the standard trade model, as in Mellitz and in Bernard, 2007, okay, if you took the two countries with CS preference, you cannot deliver this variation in export intensity across firms because in this model, firms only differ in their productivity and that all exporters sell the same share of their revenue abroad. Okay. And if you go into the extension of the model with multi-country, okay, you can get the export intensity to be vary across firm because firm can select a different set of export market. Okay. However, if conditioning on selling to the same set of export market, okay, the export intensity is identical across firm and is independent of firm productivity. So it is puzzling by the in the theoretical side also, and in the practical side also. Okay. So in this paper, okay, we try to explain this bimodality with modes near 0 and 1. Okay, we look into what determines the distribution of export intensity by using Thailand as a case study because we observe this bimodal distribution in many countries. Okay. So when we look into the Thai data, okay, Apaitan in 2019 has also documented this bimodality. Okay, so what they did is they take the universe of export data from the custom department. Then they merge this trade data with the register firm with the Ministry of Commerce. Okay, and if you look into this figure, okay, you will see that the concentration is 0 and 1 also. You can see that very few firms export, and then you can see the bimodal pattern in export intensity in all firms and in manufacturing firms and in firms that do the retail and wholesale trade. Okay. So we can see or we can observe this bimodality pattern for sure in Thai data. Okay. So what we do in this paper is the following. Okay, we do 3 things. First, we document the evidence for the bimodality of the export intensity distribution across various classifications. So we want to make sure that it is not like because some group of firms that export a lot and some of group of firms that export very little. We don't want to, emphasize that it is not the composition effect. So we show that no matter how we slice the data, we still see this bimodal pattern. Okay. Second, okay, we try to compare whether we see what we call peer exporter premium. Okay, how we define peer exporting firms are firms that export at least 90% of their output abroad, and we call the rest as general exporters. So we want to see if we see superior in the performance of these firms, so that it is important for, like for example, for policy implications, whether okay, are they more productive? Are they better in terms of in other firms' performance? Okay, and the third one is that we try to identify factors that explain the likelihood of being a peer exporter. Okay, so this is a related literature. Okay, only 4 studies so far have explored the same question. Okay, but most of them point out to the demand side factors. Okay, and also the productivity of the firm. Okay, for example, Liu showed that exporting firms are rather the firms that are less productive. Okay, and the rest tend to focus on the demand side. Okay, so what we do different in this paper is that we try to point out that it is not just the demand side. We prove that it is not the productivity that determine the bimodality of the export intensity pattern. Okay, we also show that it is also other firm characteristic that matters. For example, some firms that have foreign direct investment, some firms that receive investment incentive from the government also tends to be high export intensity firms. Okay, so come the data. Okay, so we use the Thailand manufacturing firm level data from 3 rounds of industrial census from 2007, 2012, and 2017, collected by the NSO, National Statistical Office of Thailand. Okay, so we use this data set because it contains our variable of interest, directly asked for the export intensity. It contains like a very detailed firm characteristics and also operational information. So we know how much capital they used, how much labor and skill composition of the workforce. Okay, and the advantage of this data is that we have 2 formats. Okay, the first one is the cross-sectional data because it comes from the 3 waves of survey. Okay, we have around 300,000 observations from the 3 rounds. And also we have the subsample of firms, around 10,000 of them that prevail in all the 3 waves. Okay, so this gives us the benefit of when we deal with the productivity estimation at the firm level, because as we all know that the endogeneity problem always arises when it comes to productivity estimation. Okay, so with this data, okay, this is the distribution. Okay, we see the concentration of mass around 0 and 1. Okay, we see that we have around 1/5 of the firm that export more than 90%, at least 90% of their output. And we see around 1/5 of the firm that export less than 10%. So we definitely see the bimodal distribution. Okay, and now we slice the data. Okay, we see the pattern by year of survey, by regions where the firms are located. We always see the bimodal pattern. Okay, we also plot the export intensity by industry. Okay, we observe like the bimodal pattern in almost all industries. With some industry, we have more of the pure exporters. For example, apparel, leather, food, wood industry, for example. Okay, so when we look into the firms that receive FDI, okay, we want to see if, like, for example, multinational firms, are they those that export a lot more? And the answer is no, because we see the same pattern for firms with and without the FDI. Okay, and the panel show whether firms that received investment incentive from the Board of Investment, whether they export more, a lot more. And the pattern show you that no, it is not the case again. Okay, we see very similar pattern. Okay, and we also test whether they are only processing trade firms where you import materials, assemble, and then re-export the final product. Okay, we see that the bimodal exists among firms that do not import any materials from overseas at all. Okay, and only 8% of pure exporters import 100% of their inputs. Okay, so we void out the argument that the pure exporting firms are only processing trade firms. Okay, and we also void out the argument about whether these firms are original equipment manufacturing where you are hired to produce and export. And it is not the case that firms that export a lot or pure exporters are firms that located in the free trade zone, because we found that only 18 or 19% of pure exporters are located in the province that are within the free trade zone area. So second, we also established the facts that we see pure exporter premium. So what we do is that we request firm measures on determining whether firms are pure exporters or general exporter, controlling for industry and time fixed effects. Okay, we see that pure exporters are larger in terms of output and value added, about 30%. Okay, they are relatively younger and they produce a fewer product variety. Okay, in terms of input use, okay, they use more of the both capital and labor, but there tend to be more of the labor intensive technology. Okay, so the next one show you the skill composition of the labor use. Okay, the pure exporter tend to be more use more skill and use more unskilled, but the skill intensity is insignificant. Okay, so come the firm level productivity estimation. So I'm not going into details about this because it could take like the whole session. Okay, what I'm trying to say here is that we use the panel data of subsample firms to try to estimate the unbiased and consistent firm level productivity using the method by Levinson and Patron with adjustment from Woolrich. Okay, so what we see is that we do not find significant difference between productivity of pure exporters or general exporters. So it is maybe the explanation that we do not find that the export intensity distribution that we found to be bimodal could come from the bimodal of the productivity distribution, because we do not find any different. We do find that exporters are more productive, but we do not find that among exporters, productivities are different. So important policy implication here may be that if you try to locate more resource or shift resource from general exporters toward more pure exporters, you might not get welfare improvement here. Okay, so next, okay, comes the determinants of being a pure exporter. Now we're trying to find, okay, what determine the likelihood of firms select themselves into being a firms that export at least 90% of their output. Okay, what we do is that we regress the dummy of pure exporters on regressor that include not just the demand side factors, which we foresee by the export to high income destination. Okay, we also include the firm level characteristics. For example, their age, their foreign ownership status, their import status, and we also include the government incentive by the BOI. Okay, we also control for other capital and skill intensity. Okay, so here are the results. Okay. So this is the regression we do for the panel data. We also do the same regressions for the repeated cross-sectional data. Okay. First, we include the TFP or the firm level total factor productivity. We see that the productivity cannot explain the variation in export intensity. So which is contradict to what Lu found for China, where he find that exporters are less productive. We do not find any difference among firms that export a lot or firms that export very little in terms of their productivity. Okay. Sorry, I forgot to mention about the model that we use. Okay, we use the logit model, and we also try the linear probability model because we want to include the industry and year fixed effects. Okay, and then we include additional explanatory variables, include foreign ownership and investment promotion. Okay, what we find is that firms with FDI and firms that receive investment promotion from the Board of Investment, they tend to be the firms that export most of their product overseas. Okay. We also find that firms that are relatively younger, they export more compared to other exporters. Okay. And to confirm that TFP or firm level productivity does not play any role, we include the square term and the interaction terms. And we also control for the capital intensity. Okay. We also control for whether firms are located in free trade zone. Okay. And we also control for the demand side factor, the high income export destination. Okay. We find that firms that export to high income export destination tend to export more or tend to be pure exporter. Okay, so we find very similar coefficient or the magnitude when we use the linear probability model, when we also control for the industry and year fixed effect. Okay. So we do a lot more in our paper. Okay, for those of you who are interested, we have the draft of our paper ready. Okay, this is the short version of our paper. Okay, so I want to jump into the conclusion. Okay, so we use the firm level data on Thai manufacturing firms to show that the bimodality of export intensity always persists no matter how you slice the data. We also prove consistent with Mellett's model that we do not find evidence that firm productivity can explain the variation in export intensity. We also identify other factors than the demand side factors which have been established in the literature. We find that pure exporters are relatively younger, have foreign ownership, produce more concentrated product variety, and export to high income country destinations. Okay, thank you. So,
thank you very much, Ajahn Doungdao, for the presentation here. I'm sure we have learned a lot from this talk. All right, so